There's perhaps less people here than here today. We can see there's a lot of people here today. Last week we had a talk in Moriette in Lalande, and today in Biarritz we're going to try together to answer the same question, even though the three different parts of the coast have their own specificities. How far will the coast retreat? Do we need to respond to this? Who has to pay? Should we relocate low activities? Is this possible everywhere? Is the environmental protection compatible? What about the economic players, associations, and the politicians? Should we need a new form of governance for the coastline in Aquitaine? We don't intend to exhaust all these subjects this evening, but we want to try to start to answer the questions with you and to try to adopt a platform. With us this evening we have, for this debate, Michel Venac, the Mayor of Biarritz. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for coming this evening. It's not always an easy relationship with politicians, not as easy as you. We have the head of the Caisse d'Épargne et des Impôts. We have Philippe Maison, who is the coordinator of the environment for Surfrider Europe. Thank you for coming here, Mr. Coert. I hope I've not mispronounced your Nordic-sounding name. Head of Surfrider Myanmar in Biarritz, and Philippe Marron, a university lecturer in Pau and member of the CIAM. 3 points before we begin the debate. Firstly, our debate is free. Everyone will be able to participate. You will be able to talk, ask your questions, and take part in the roundtable discussion. We will finish at 8:15, and we think that 2 hours is enough to look at all the different aspects and issues that have brought us together this evening. And thirdly, smile, you're on camera. There's TV7 is filming you this evening. This belongs to Sud-Ouest. And these will be broadcast on our website and on any other websites which want to relay these videos. My first question is for you, Philippe Marron. We know the University of Pau and the Pays de la Dour. The team of researchers which you take part in has observed. What have you observed along the Basque Coast? The CIAM is a group of researchers from the University of Pau and the Pays de la Dour, which works on in the field of mechanics, and I belong to a team with 3 people, which is called Interaction Waves Structures, which works mainly, as I was saying, on the issues to do with the propagation of tsunamis, but we also work on all forms of exceptional impacts. Storms, for example, is one of the things we will be talking about today. And we've followed up the coast, and especially the beaches in the southern part of Anglet. And what were you able to observe after last winter storms? And have you seen that the coast has been retreating? Many of the beaches in Anglet, we've observed erosion. This erosion is quite significant, not necessarily visible, because the beach is redone before every summer. But this erosion is not something that we necessarily see on the surface, but there's less and less sand, and there's a decreasing stock of sand. Is this something you've been able to measure? Is it regular? Is it permanent? It's irregular because it depends on many phenomena. It depends also on the tides going up the Adour River as well. It's a phenomenon which the more it is worked on, the more it's going to happen. But in terms of measuring it, I can't give you just an exact figure off the top of my head. But what have been the lessons of last winter storms? I would say that we're still working on these. The first studies we've carried out, and which we're now publishing. Tomorrow morning there's a conference in Dunkirk. Since the storm since 1958, we've listed all the events, the storm events, to see how we can define what a storm is and how we can see what the impact of a storm is. We tried to define different parameters. We're currently working on the intensity of storms. What we can say about the last few storms, they're not necessarily very intense storms, but they were very repetitive in time, and that's something which is very specific. So less strong, but more repeated. I would say the repetition of average intensity storms. We've tried to study the result of these storms. Is it immediate? Is it later on? At the moment, it's difficult to know because these are criteria which require a follow-up period of between 6 and 8 years. And in the long term, 30 to 40 years. Is there an explanation for these storms? Is nature going crazy? Have we made it go crazy? What's certain is that human activities have an impact, but what we've worked on, we've not been able to observe an increase in the number of storms in our current research due to human activities. We can't necessarily correlate the relationship. We don't have enough hindsight to be able to say this yet. Thank you, Mr. Mahon. Come back whenever you want. Mr. Vanak, you're the mayor of Biarritz. What have the storms of last winter taught us? In terms of what we know, I'm saying this going back over a century now, the erosion which we fight against, which requires certain structures to be built to protect the cliffs. Perhaps what it's taught us is that there's a second random effect, the effect of submersion, especially for beaches, because there was an episode, you say perhaps the oceanographic values were not perhaps as intense as during other storms. But in terms of submersion, the values were very high. And it showed that this was an additional factor to be added to that of erosion. Biarritz has been fighting for a long time with structures to protect the cliffs, because on top of the cliffs there's housing, and it's a very important effect, which is continuing. But nevertheless, we feel that there's a new element which is coming to the equation: flooding, being submersed, even though this was very localized on certain beaches. Mr. Marron? Just an extra point. The studies we did, it didn't take into account the tide. It didn't take into account the tide coefficients can change facts. We can see the erosion. I went to celebrate to a local celebration, and I spoke to somebody who was older, and who said that there was a place which was completely different physically. And so for us, it's been very much a revelation. We'll come back to the resources that you're applying a little bit later on. We'll deal with secondly, but for the moment, we're talking about these storms in the town. Do you think that perhaps Biarritz needs to change its model of development, or can we continue? We need to continue protecting the coast. This is one of the questions you talked about before. Is the compatibility between tourist activities in particular and environmental protection? These can be compatible. We can protect the environment in favor of tourism, but it's not the case of what has happened over the last 20, 25 years. We are trying to think about sustainable tourism to protect the coast, to ensure that there are no devastating effects along the coast. And so from that point of view, Biarritz is very much an example. You are in charge of the Hotel Miramar, the Sofitel. What was your experience of this stormy period last winter? Because it created a great deal of damage in your hotel, which is located on the coastal front. To perhaps answer what the mayor said, what we need to all do is to be humble when we're talking about the sea, which is not something that we can really challenge. The waves actually came into the hotel. Luckily it was 6 a.m, and not while our customers were in the swimming pools. The water came in. There was one wave in particular that entered, but it was the one wave too many. We could see the waves coming and hitting the promenade, and we'd already seen this in the past. But nevertheless, we'd not seen this a lot. I've been here for 6 years, and I've already seen waves this size. And what was the damage? There was quite significant damage. The indoor pool, the gym were completely damaged. That's 600 million euros of damage from just one wave. Are you insured for that? It's insured, but as you know, the insurance always come when you need them, but then you pay for them afterwards. Philippe Maison, you're the coordinator. You're here at home today. You're the environmental coordinator here at Surfrider Europe. What have you learned from the storms of last winter, and what did you say about this area to which you're very attached? I'm going to repeat what's just been said. I think this incident reminds us we all need to be very humble. When we're talking about the ocean, we love the ocean, we love the coast, but we need to respect this as well. Regularly, perhaps because we try to constrain it too much, or because we've tried to impose unreasonable limits, the ocean reminds us from time to time of its strength. So we need a new form of governance, and a new form of planning. We need to sit around the table together and come up with new ideas. we need to think carefully and not have a knee-jerk reaction. Even though there was a combination of events which meant that these average-sized storms created a lot more damage than we would have initially thought, perhaps we need to start wondering about how the form of governance of the seafront, and I think we need to live with the ocean, not live against it. What would you like to highlight in terms of governance? I think all these issues in planning, local development, on a global level, on a European level, and even on a local level, we need to integrate all these factors, all this experience. We've seen the storms, we've talked about tourism, about needs, sustainable tourism. We need to integrate these environmental, these social criteria for the different uses of the coastline. We now need to integrate all of these into our policies, into our choices for development and planning in order to solve these problems. I think we all agree that this won't be the last time that this kind of event will happen. So, Ricard, you're head of the Caisse de dépôt in Aquitaine. Why is the Caisse de dépôt interested in this question, and why have you joined this fight? Why are you concerned? Well, I involved the Aquitaine Caisse de dépôt because I said yes because we need to look at what the Caisse de dépôt is. It's a French institution, a financial institution, which is dedicated to general interest. This is a fundamental point. This involves trust. We are not a long-term operator. We're interested in subjects which are transversal. We have known a troubled periods in the past, and we've gone through wars, and we've enabled the country to equip itself with telephone, electricity, etc. Everything which today seems so obvious. And despite the crises, despite the storms, this is a play on words, we've allowed long-term financing of in the country's infrastructures. So with this background, this constant background of our actions for local territories, for our partners in Aquitaine, the notion of coastline is very important, and which impacts heavily the long-term general interest. And so it's logical that we take an interest in this sea phenomenon because it has an impact on economic development. We've seen that in Biarritz, that on hotel activities. In other regions, it can affect leisure parks, campsites. It has a direct impact on a huge economic sector. It's not the only one, of course. We're very heavily attached to urbanization, and we know that when we push things a little too far, where we can build in places we shouldn't. If we look at history, we can see that we're part of a generation which thought it was able to tame the elements. And I think we've seen that nature's bounced back to remind us that it's still there and still the master of things. We find it difficult to foresee certain things, so we need to have a logic which integrates this idea of variables, the unknown. Can the unknown be mastered? And see what our ability to respond to these phenomena is. And this is why I wanted to take this opportunity and to use this debate on coastline erosion to help participate in this debate. We're going to talk about governance. There's no perfect governance, but by definition there's no imperfect governance. We need to see where we need to place ourselves. I think this evening is an illustration that today we have increasingly powerful digital tools, which mean that we can more easily now share information on these complex subjects. I don't think there's any absolute truth. Some sciences may be more exact than others, but I think that pure and perfect knowledge on these subjects is very, very complex and difficult. We need to realize that the data is complex, difficult to understand, and very surprising. I think that this will be a huge advantage if we realize this, and so that's why I wanted to take part in this event. You're talking about governance. We can see that mayors are financially in a difficult situation. So, do we need to get the regional authorities involved? Do we need to? What is the right level of governance? What do you think about this? All the levels of governance are good, provided that there's communication between the different levels, and that in this field, I'm not a specialist in this field, other people here today are, but I know from experience that when we look at the coastline, when we look at protecting it, we never really know in the short term and in the long term what's going to happen. And we don't know what the reaction of nature is going to be in different places. And of course there may be effects felt further afield than the protection that we've provided. So I think it'd be very pretentious to say that all the players need to talk together, and we need to be very humble. And this is something we tend to forget. Mr. what was the amount, the financial amount of damage from last winter's storms for the town of Yates, and what are you currently doing with whom to try to repair or correct or protect the coastline more? Well, in terms of public property, the price tag is €1.5 million. In terms of public investment, it's €40 million. But of course, there's also private property which was affected. So with the coastal towns Anglet, Guétary, and Bidat, when we found out that this event wasn't classed as an exceptional event, this meant that the state's lack of recognition would not enable us to achieve certain funding. All the different values that were measured were values which did not theoretically justify the classification of the event as a catastrophe. Here, for example, in the past, the same values would have provided this classification, and so we contested this in the courts, and we will see what happens next. But what's very surprising, when we saw, for example, if I take the example of what happened at the old fishing port, phenomenal destruction of buildings. The clock, which was 7 meters high, was just swept away by the waves. It was almost like a mini tsunami. Then it seems very strange that the state doesn't recognize the area as one that's been struck by a natural catastrophe. I asked the Aquitaine Regional Council which to pay a subsidy. They paid €1 million for the entire Aquitaine coast, which for the entire region is not enough. We would have liked more. So the financial problem raised by this event is recurring because we need to consolidate the cliffs, for example. This is something that has been necessary for a long time, and it's cost an absolute fortune. We need the help of a lot of partners, and of course with the current financial situation, this help is becoming increasingly rare. So we need to see how in the future we're going to continue consolidate when we work on the cliffs at the Côte de Basque, for example. We've had to work on the top of the cliff. We've had to carry out drainage work within the rocks. That cost 40,000 euros per square meter. So perhaps I'll have to speak to the representative of the Caisse de dépôt a little bit later on about this problem. He's the one with the money. Loans are over 40 years. But this subject is important. We talked about quick submersion, but behind this description, I'm calling on all mayors to fight against erosion is also something which should take into account submersive waves. Mr. Venac, you've talked about repairs. In 2 months, we should get an answer. We should finish this work. So financially, who has the power? The state is reducing its budget. Biarritz has an amount of money. Who is going to be able to trigger to start tomorrow's protection? I think today the coastal towns, there are 2 types of expenses. The biggest are to protect the coastline. We're going to need very precise strategies, and secondly is the quality of bathing water. All of this concerns coastal areas, and this requires very heavy funding. I can't give you an exact figure like that, but it is very, very expensive indeed. In terms of bathing water, since the 1995 until 2005, over a decade, we spent about 150 million euros on used on water treatment, and we have to take a look at where local authorities come in here. We know that people don't want to pay more and more taxes, so the result is that local authorities are in a difficult situation financially. in terms of financing the consolidation of the cliffs and the creation of structures. Since the 1980s in Biarritz, we were very efficient in terms of financing with a combination of European funding and regional authorities. We can see that the FEDER funds, 375 million in Aquitaine until 2020. But this isn't for but this has to involve research on startups, etc. And I understand this, but in terms of very daily expenses, for example, consolidating the cliffs, we need to find a different form of financing. Do you need to work with district authorities as well? We need a local strategy to defend the coastline. We're currently thinking about this and working on a plan to protect the coastline. And this work is very important because the characteristics of our coastline mean that we need a local plan. We can't generalize forms of protection. There are places where you can have softer, more natural forms of protection. But here, this is not the case. We have more rocks, it's more exposed. So each area needs to draft a plan to find the form of protection that's required. And how long does it take you to draft such a document? A few months. I'm looking at my friend from Bidart here, Marco Berra. We're working on this. The mayor also develops the town, provides building permits. How have these been affected? Over the last few years, the coastal law is a law which has imposed a certain number of very precise constraints. And this is something that shouldn't be changed because some mayors would like it to be changed. I don't think it should be changed. It needs to be respected. And this will enable us to preserve a strip of around 100 meters along the coastline. And so I think that development for tourist activities is a necessity our economy is based on. We've been for about 100 years now a very important coastal resort. And our form of urbanization has been based on this. We can't avoid this. Our town centre is close to the sea. Like all other coastal towns of the same type, we've built close to the sea, close to the ocean. Beautiful villas, beautiful buildings. This is part of our heritage. It has to be preserved. So our role is to protect this heritage, to avoid making any architectural errors in the future. I think, as I said before, over the last 20 years or so, we've been quite respectful of the environment and we've not provided building permits. This is something, obviously, that property developers complained about. We need to develop tourist activities of the town. And I think it's worth mentioning as well that Biarritz has just been chosen as an international brand names for which France is going to develop abroad, which is a great piece of news for us. But at the same time, we have to be respectful of a superb environment like ours. Can't we relocate certain activities, certain parts of the town's housing? Is this something which could be envisaged? Perhaps some of this could be. I don't see how we could move the casino, for example. It's a huge building. It's also we have a very. There's not much we can move in terms of the existing structures, but we need to continue our work to protect the coastline. That's our destiny, our fate. Mr. Maison, would you like to react to what Mr. Van Eyck has just said about our obligation to to maintain the level of economic development based on tourism? In terms of development plans, I think it's worth going back over a couple of figures. Here, we're at Surfrider Foundation. The surf activity is 1 million days of surfing per year, 46 million euros. It's part of all the development issues you've just talked about. And in terms of to answer your question, local development, we need to look at our past experience. There's some things which work well, others which don't, and the environment, the coastline, are not fixed in stone. As soon as we do something somewhere, you all learn this at school. An action leads to a reaction. So if we do something in a particular place, it'll create an effect somewhere else. And we need to integrate this into what we do. With our infrastructures, we have an impact on nature, and this needs to be taken into account. So the environment is something which is moving. It's moving in part because of us as well. So it's essential we take these factors into account. First, that was my first point, and secondly, today in the 21st century, we need to develop, I go back over the question of governance, we need to develop true strategies for developing the area. The configuration is different from one place to another. For example, in Biarritz, I would say Biarritz is very constrained because it's in a particular area. It's not very easy to relocate certain things, but we need to think now about our whole area. What's the scale perhaps needs to be adapted to the context in the face of such complex phenomena. You're passionate about the ocean. Not just for Biarritz, but for the whole of the coastline. Do you not think we've come to the end of an era in terms of development? Do you think we've been giving too much importance to the economy, destroying the environment? I think that we've talked about development for many years, and then we've come up with this concept of sustainable development. I think this concept has gone far beyond the word development. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be a part, an integral part of this. We've been talking about the economy, which is important, but we have the environmental parameter, which is very important, and which shows that there's also the social aspect. The surfing activity has an economic impact, but Biarritz and at least the Basque Coast has this magnificent image of its environment, and there's word of mouth about the fact that it's possible to have nautical activities, especially surfing. Here is we have world-renowned surf spots. This heritage or relationship with the ocean is fundamental. And of course, it's not easy to give a numeric value to this. It's not easy to assign a number to it. You've been talking about a cry of the heart from the ocean. We need to integrate all of these social systems, economic, social, environmental, into the equation. Do you not think we should move the Miramar Hotel back a little bit? How are you going to deal with the ocean with your customers? Is your hotel is it sustainable? We could move it back, but it would be very difficult. Because behind our hotel there are houses. To go back to the question, I think economy and environment can go hand in hand. I think we can preserve, I think to preserve our economy, we need a healthy environment. For us, 50% of our customers are what we call, in French, curious. They're coming for spa treatment. They come for the well-being effects of seawater. Seawater is full of oligoelements, potassium, magnesium, sodium, and lots of other things. And sea bathing at 36 degrees is better than taking vitamin pills all year. And that's why we're here. I have 68 people, members of staff, who work at our thalassotherapy centre all year round. And in all we have 185 people who live from the ocean and everything the ocean provides. Surfrider Foundation and other actions, we support them because they're important for us. They have a voice which is much louder than ours, to ask institutions, to ask you all to be careful with the ocean. And that's why I say the economy and the environment can go hand in hand with each other. What actions are you going to commit to in terms of coastal protection? Is there anything you are going to do? Do you mean in terms of working for the environment or to protect your hotel? We can't really protect the hotel any more than we do already. We don't want to build a huge wall in front of the hotel. We just have to hope that there won't be any more submersive waves like this. We can't do work. The only thing we can do, now we need to rebuild the glass facade. We need to use materials which are thicker, stronger, more resistant, to try to protect ourselves better. But water is one of the few things which we can't fight against. If it strikes, it strikes. It's one of the few materials that cannot be compacted. So the only thing we can do is to try to build something that's a little bit more solid. And that's all we can do, really. Mr. Mahan, would you like to react to what you've heard? We're protecting, we're hoping that next time round it'll be more robust. What is, you're a scientist, what is your point of view? It's a difficult question because protecting requires a certain number of modifications. So whatever we do, there will always be an impact elsewhere. If, as the gentleman just said, we can't build a huge wall in front of the hotel because that's what people are coming for. It would destroy the beach that people are coming for. So we need to say whatever we do, it's going to have consequences. So we need to integrate as much as we can all the possible consequences and to do as little bad or damage as possible because we no longer have the choice. Ideally, we'd move back. The whole problem comes from the fact that 100 years ago, people said the sea's limit is in such and such a place. And that has now moved. Now we're realizing what problem we have. But of course it's impossible to move backwards from the sea. It's not possible. Perhaps there are a few places where it's possible. But perhaps we need to close off the top of the cliffs to protect the bottom. But that we need to realize that there are certain choices we need to make, and whatever the choice we make, it's going to have an impact somewhere. Mr. Vanak, you're the mayor. What do you know what we have to do? What we should do? On the coastline in Aquitaine, we've had the chance of having rather, over the past 40 years or so, the coastline hasn't deteriorated too much. Because we talked about the VIACA, the development plan, and this interministerial mission with somebody who had an intuition, a lot of intuition. He said was to make the Aquitaine coast one of the most protected coastlines in Europe. But today, because we're trying to centralize everything, who could do such a thing today? I think today the regional authorities are trying to continue this work. The GIP Littoral provides analyses and are doing a great deal of work to observe the differences along the coastline and what actions could be implemented to develop realistically, even in places where there's nothing to be protected, to move back. For example, there's no point in spending millions of euros of money in places where there's no need for it. We need to concentrate the money in places where the stakes are very high, where there's economic stakes. So I think we need a coastline management strategy which targets the places which most need protecting. If we make comparisons with the south of France, the Mediterranean coast, for example, along there are other very bad examples. For example, on the Costa Brava, for example, they're on the fifth series of buildings. They've moved it back 5 times now. They're constantly moving back the buildings. We've been lucky in so far as we haven't had to do this. But we can see in places in Biarritz there are some structures which protect the coastline, the Côte de Basque, for example. This is a good example. We need to continue. And there are other places where protection is, I think, where you are, for example, there's no structure which could provide protection required. This is true at the Pavillon Royal or in Bidart. The International Center, Golf Training Center in Biarritz is threatened today. There's 2 holes which are threatened by the sea. If we do nothing to protect them, does that mean golf will disappear? Perhaps not, but nevertheless, we need to look at how we can protect these kind of facilities. Do we have the chairman of the golf course here? Perhaps could you tell us what happened, what do you intend to do, and how you're going to finance this? You're sitting in the middle of the room. Perhaps we could pass him a microphone. Please introduce yourself for the proceedings of the meeting. I'm Anna Strad. I'm the chairman of the golf course in Biarritz, and our group is an economic interest group which manages the golf course. And in terms of the International Golf Centre in Biarritz, as the mayor said, for much longer than simply last year, for the last 4 or 5 years, there are a certain number of holes which are threatened by the sea, by phenomena of erosion and waves. And what we need to say today is that it's not necessarily this year that the erosion has been the most significant, but nevertheless, we need to look at this question, this issue, and see how it affects the town services with the town hall. And This requires a lot of technical analysis. What have you already done to consolidate these for protection? Does it mean we will have to stop playing golf? Personally, I've taken part in an action where we have a specific philosophy. We need to ask, are we going to protect things, or are we just going to let nature take back over these things? For example, in Anglet at the Chambre d'Amour, there are certain plots which were planned and which were stopped by the local development plan. It was a combat, I remember, it was a very difficult combat. There's the hotel which and sent plots which were stopped, and this was the strategy decided at the time, the good one, the right one. The town hall did what it had to do, and nature took back over. But in Biarritz, we need to decide what to do. Sorry, I'm not a golfer. Could we not just simply put the holes elsewhere? That's an idea, it's your opinion. And I'll make a note of it. But I'm not trying to provoke you. It's not impossible. We could relocate some holes. So it's something that we could envisage, but it's not something that we've decided on for the moment. Perhaps we could open up the discussion to the room. There's a question at the back of the room. A lady at the back of the room, could you introduce yourself and could you ask your question, introduce yourself and say who you're asking your question to? Tiffen, I work here at Surfrider and I have a question, a general question. We've talked about the golf course, we've talked about protecting things, doing things to protect structures, to protect our coastline. But we're talking about build, and it's a very French idea to protect heritage. Should we not deconstruct rather than construct? Because in the future we're simply going to have to pay out even more money to protect things again, at a time when public funding is very scarce. If I take the example of Biarritz, I've been on the town hall in Biarritz for about 20 years now. We've not built a great deal along the coastline. We've renovated the spa establishment, but we've not built anything as such. On the coastline, we've taken all the cars off the coastline to make it as natural as possible. I mean, perhaps we could, apart from, demolishing certain buildings, I don't really see what we can do. I understand your point of view, but I think we need to avoid new constructions which would be exposed to erosion and the waves and submersion, and try to preserve the coastline we have. Another question behind, lady behind. Gentlemen, 2 points I'd like to mention with regard to this winter storms, because at Surfrider we have observed these phenomena very closely. There were in fact 2 storms which caused damage with submersive waves, and it was the combination of exceptional circumstances. There was the 6th and 7th of January, because with the wave, and there was a depression below 930 hectopascals. It's a depression in the Atlantic. When we look at how it was formed, there was a combination of weather circumstances, and this led to a corridor, weather corridor, with winter depression. And the second phenomenon that meant that on that particular day the waves were more violent. The tide wasn't very strong. there was a very strong current. It had a very high speed and and struck the coastline very strongly. It was the second time, unfortunately, there was the height of the waves coincided with a very large tide coefficient, and so obviously this meant that both combined plus the wind. What I'm trying to say here is that we've been talking a lot about there's the phenomenon of erosion, of the strength of the winter storms, but there were two very specific phenomena. But the rest was, as our scientist mentioned, it was just simply an average storm. Perhaps you'd like to react to what's just been said, and then we'll pass the microphone over to the lady. I think it was the combination of several events which was so extraordinary. Does this mean it's not going to happen again? In 100 years, 200 years? There's a certain random element here. There's a succession of repetitive storms, one after the other. Statistically, this means that, of course, there was one that was going to fall at the time when there was a strong tide. That's the... We represent the Association for the Protection and Valorisation of the cliffs from Miramar to the Chambre d'Amour in Anglet. The chairperson is here today. This association was born in 1919 after some catastrophic events. And I also work as a lawyer. In parallel, we have worked a great deal with many municipalities. We work with Bidat, with Biarritz, and Anglet, and we have a geological heritage, an architectural heritage, which, with some of the most beautiful of the coast villas, with the Vernon Beach, and also the Chambre d'Amour. And we have also worked a great deal on studies about the Atlantic coast called Antea, and the IRBGM. If the whole case would have filled, the paperwork for the whole case would have filled 2 supermarket trolleys. Legally, it's very difficult to protect yourself against the sea, and it's also very difficult to protect the heritage from the sea. There's no contradiction between protecting the environment and protecting heritage and architecture. But if we want to do something, if we want to preserve all of it, we need to mobilize general interest and as much private and public money as possible. We need partnerships. Let me give you an example here. We've worked a great deal on there were 2 owners in the area where we work. They have what's called a free syndical association. I won't go into the details here. They tried to mobilize funds, a great deal of funds, with the help of Antea. We're talking about 5 or 6 million euros for 2 individual owners. 6 million euros to stop the erosion of the erosion on these 2 properties. One on top of the Chambre d'Amour and another a little bit further on in the municipality of Biarritz. At the end, this didn't actually come to a successful conclusion due to a lack of funding or for legal reasons and administrative reasons. Because there's Natura 2000, because you need an inspection, but there's a whole series of management and administrative reasons which meant that when you have private property owners, you need to fight for 5 or 6 years to get results. So this exhausts people. People don't have the energy to do this. So we need to make sure we don't create a contradiction between protecting the environment and we need to mobilize private and public funds in the name of general interest. Mr. Maison, would you like to react to those? Mr. Benac? Good evening, Joël. I think that the problem we have here in the Vernon Cliff case is that the properties are private. Something is private, and that makes things even more complicated. Public authorities cannot intervene very easily in the field of private property. The question that was asked by Maître Dacier is very relevant. What can we do, nevertheless, to make sure that in that particular place, even though it's private property, for erosion, not to threaten housing? And I agree we need active partnerships between the public and private sectors. We have perhaps not found the ideal solution yet. This is something that we need to work on. We're working on now, I think, Joël. We've been talking about preserving heritage. There's not about a single piece part of our heritage. We're talking about heritage in general: cultural, tourist, urban, housing, the ocean, geological heritage even. We have all this heritage to be taken into account. So the question we need to ask: heritage is not something that can be presented or expressed. It's how can we take into account this heritage in development policies, for example? And we also come back to this question of urban development and local development, and here we're in a round table discussion. We need to sit down together, all the players need to sit down together and listen to the arguments of each side, and to try to come up with some common agreed conclusions. And of course this is very difficult because not everybody agrees on the different criteria. In certain places, you've all heard, perhaps, I put in inverted commas, we talked a lot about climate change. The oceans are going to rise. But we're going to have more and more, we're going to see more and more of this type of problem occur. So we need to one day ask the question, or accept asking this question about, do we not need to abandon part of our land, whether it be in an urban area or an unbuilt area? But this is a question that we need to face up to. Michel Benac, who represents general interest here? Is it the elected representative? Is it the employer? Is it the participant in associations? Is this everybody? Associations have a word, should be able to put in their word, and then the decisions need to be taken by the politicians. But I think the politician needs to take into account all the observations which are relevant, observations by experts. I'd like to add another dimension to this debate. I cannot consider the ocean as a threat. It's a formidable resource. It's a resource for our activity today. We have a tourist activity on the coast, but I think as well it's a resource for tomorrow's economic activities. I'm in Biarritz, I'm in the conurbation, and I think we need to develop the sea economy. We need to take into account the human, ecological factors, so that tomorrow's development for example, in the Spanish Basque Country, there's a lot being done already, and we're not up to the same level as them yet. So I think we need to develop the sea economy. We need to protect the ocean. And to protect the ocean, we need to have income which will help us to do so. And we need to exploit in an intelligent, smart way this fabulous resource which humanity needs, whether in terms of food or minerals or energy or health. It's in the ocean that humanity will find tomorrow the answers to so many concerns that we have today. And these states, I want Biarritz to have its modest role to play in this. What are they doing in the Spanish Basque Country? You mentioned the Spanish Basque Country. What do they do there? Drive 40 kilometers over the border here to Pasajes and go and see Tecnalia, and you'll see people who've been working for 10 years on renewable marine energies, on medicines from the sea, on all these questions, on the incredible wealth of the oceans. And they've been doing this for a long time. I think we're behind and we need to catch up.
Madame, puis monsieur d'abord, puis madame qui était derrière vous. Monsieur, je vous en prie.
Il faut peut-être appuyer sur le bouton.
Il faut peut-être appuyer sur le bouton derrière.
Ah non, il n'y a pas de bouton. C'est pas fait.
Ah non, il n'y a pas de bouton.
Oui,
Former councillor from Biarritz. I'd like to go back over what I said one day at a local council meeting in September. In the past century, on the Côte de Basque, there was a very high tide. On a normal day, there was still sand. Mr. Piapti was an engineer from the Général des Eaux and who wrote in a local newspaper in 2014. The same was not the case for the Plage des Basques, because I remember when it was still accessible at high tide. I'm sometimes saying that we've talked a lot about protecting the coastline, but we've not talked about the rise of the oceans. And in October 2013, there was the intergovernmental group of experts on climate who mentioned the rise of the oceans and coastal protection. So I think we need to talk about this a little bit, because even if we've had exceptional tides, we're going to have an increasing number of exceptional tides as the ocean rises. In the 1930s, at the Cap Saint-Martin, behind there was an engineer who began to have an electricity production plant at the bottom of the cliffs. There was a tank which filled with water. This was in the cliffs, and here he produced electricity. And I read a few days ago in Sud-Ouest that there's an article about this, where we want to use the sea's energy in Anglet. And I sent to the journalist in Sud-Ouest the information I had about this to complete his article. The lady behind, Sylvie Baron. I'm a journalist specialising in the environment. I get the impression that, from what you said, that there's a scale of time here. A decision taken by an elected representative over 5 years will not be the same in 10 years' time, and definitely not in 50 years' time. There are good decisions over a 10-year period, which will be catastrophic over a 50-year period. And I want to give you a specific example. Guy Long, who is at the Aquitaine Conservatory and who was supposed to be here today, has not been able to attend, who thought that as a specialist it would be under the sea in 5 years. Before the construction of the Cité de l'Océan, there were negotiations between the town hall and the Conservatoire of the coastline, and it was trying to, from the Lake Moresco to the beach, they wanted to make this an unbuildable area, but the environmentalist there were posed a great deal of questions. There were a number of choices made. In 10 years' time, in 50 years' time, will the ocean have taken back over this area? Perhaps the ocean will make its own decision. You said 5 years. 5 years. You said 5 years. You should have said 6. At the end of my mandate. I would like to ask what this observation is based on. Unfortunately, the person who made this observation is not here to be able to support this. I mistrust some of the alarmist observations which are made. I've worked in the district authorities over the last 6 years on the climate energy plan for the district authorities, and we've looked at these questions, these issues, and all the effects that climate change may have. We've seen the efforts we need to make to improve our carbon contribution and energy, and I think we need to have the political will to move forward. There will be a PECT in Biarritz, a climate and territory plan. Each municipality will have this with its own energy strategy. But to say that in 5 years the Cité de l'Océan will be under the water, I think it's perhaps a little bit audacious and perhaps even irresponsible. We have ensured that the Conservatory of the coastline has provided the protection, and here the Cité de l'Océan is very often discredited. The light is the flagship of our intention to enter the economy of the sea, and I think it's a formidable way of showing our intention. We'll have to talk about this again. I invite you to come and see what we're doing at the Cité de l'Océan. But this problem of the scale of time, whatever the quality of your intentions or of changing things, of moving things, of creating employment, whatever the intention in the general interest, if in 25 years I'm perhaps going to turn the question back on you. There's a difference between geological time and the time of a politician's mandate. What appreciations should be made? I follow with great interest the work of the GIEC on climate change. They give timescales which are quite recent. But nevertheless, I think that politicians are working in a shorter time period. But nevertheless, we don't forget all this data. We try to integrate this data into what we do, into our debate. The gentleman. I'm the mayor of Guétari. In light of everything that's been said, what are we doing today? We're all working on the coastline with the GIET strategies. We're not talking about local strategies. We have a local strategy to try to take into account the question of the issue of protection. The territory risk of flooding in the Bayonne area for flooding from the Adour and the coast from Bidat as far as Zonday, we are subject to submersion. If we look at the maps, the GIEC has said that by the end of the century, there will be a 60 centimetre rise along the coastline of the ocean. So we'll talk about flooding. And
parce qu'ils ne prennent pas en compte les paquets de mer. Ce sont les paquets de mer qui sont les plus
Donc voilà, si vous voulez, on commence,
we
tout le monde est en train de
all beginning to work on this.
les terris sont
Stems from a European directive. It's applicable by everybody.
pas grave parce qu'il n'y aura pas de débordement. Mais seulement
And it looks at flooding, but not just the seas flooding.
pour la mer, tout ce qu'on pourra dire, tout ce qu'on
In terms of the sea,
sur la mer,
the sea needs space.
pour que derrière la vague puisse se détendre. Aujourd'hui,
Today there's either rocky areas or it's built on. We at Sud-Ouest, we and our team at TV7 and Surfrider Foundation has done even this as we're we're broadcasting this debate live and translating into English. There are some questions which we've received from YouTube. Should we provide more rocks in to protect the coast? I've been on the field since 1995, and we should be realistic. There are technicians here today from Antia, and we need rock protection, but we need 6-ton Ophite blocks for them not to move with the sea. So what I mean to say is, we can't rewrite history. Our towns are as they are. We're in the eye of the cyclone with the prefect. We need to restore our beaches as they were before for the tourist season. But the prefect wants to force us to demolish the construction on the beaches. What do we do for our economy then? Do we relocate? I agree, we could relocate, but the question is, where do we relocate to? Because there is a railway just behind the beach. So I'm the first one to defend the Coastal Act, but we need to see how we can support the economy and take into account these environmental constraints. And who's going to pay for these for relocating the restaurants in Getafe, for example? The 2 restaurants which are damaged. The restaurants themselves have to pay for to repair the damage, and who's going to pay to relocate them? And so, and they weren't not going to receive any public funding to relocate. So my question is clear: what can we do? I've already seen with the Chamber of Commerce. I've already looked at with them to try to give a figure for these actions. In September, we're going to have a meeting to measure the economic aspect. Would you like to react to that? I'd like to react to the final question that was asked. We talked about the question of time. We've talked about the future, the past, but there's something which is very important and which we tend to forget, not only on the coastline, is collective memory, our memory of events, which means that very often we build along the coastline in places where we shouldn't. We think about the Cynthia storm a few years ago. We need to think back about what's happened in the past. Because all of these issues still exist, plus they're augmented by climate change as well. And we talked about the quality of the work at Surfrider. We've looked at all these climate-related questions because they affect us all. It's the ocean. Here we have at Surfrider a network called the Keepers of the Coast. And so if something's wrong, then we need to be alerted. That's what we're here for. I agree with what you say. The first event was a tidal wave in 1924, which destroyed everything. Then 1959, 1969, 1972. The year I was elected, I thought I was going to have a calm year. The sea broke everything. And so we've got so used to it with the water management plan, of which I'm the chairperson. We've developed a risk of culture, and I think this is very important. Today we have the tools available. We've talked about tools. The prefecture is not precise enough. They said that we're going to have a storm in the next 24 hours and that there'll be submersive waves. But we have tools available which we're able to say what's going to happen. The surfers are very well equipped for weather forecasts. I think that we need to implement this risk culture, and in our municipalities, do you think that we're trying to protect too much, we're not accepting risk too much? The culture of risk means that you accept that something is going to happen. And this is something that municipalities need to include so that we can alert when necessary. Gibus, you have the floor, and then there's a gentleman at the front. I'm perhaps talking to the politicians now more than anybody. Along the coastline, we have a great deal of experience in erosion. There have been good political decisions, bad political decisions taken. You talked about the past experience. The Côte de Basque almost was turned into a port. If it had been turned into a port, then imagine what would have happened this winter. There have been good decisions taken. In Anglet, where the coast is sandy, it's like in the Landes, we end up with very stupid situations. For example, we have the silting up of the Adour River, which is then dumped in the sea. The district authorities have decided to dredge the river. They're using a Dutch company, and we've just discovered through certain observations that the sand is actually being thrown back into the sea just at the edge, just at the mouth of the estuary. So of course this is going to come back in. But it should be, of course, spread out. It should be spread along the coastline. And what we saw prevented this was prevented was simply because the specifications given to the company by the Port of Bayonne said they had to dump the sand at sea, so that, of course, the company will do things as cheaply as possible, respecting the specifications. And of course, this sand could have been used again for on the beaches in the summer. It's not logical. I just simply like to say that what you've just said, the same thing happened in Soulac, with exactly on the same answer. There was dredging in the Gironde estuary. The sand was thrown back into the sea a little bit further away in the sea. The answer was exactly the same. And of course, then this... and so it actually ended up being a lot more expensive than it should have been. Perhaps we're going to pass the floor over to the gentleman over here for this specific point. You represent Antea? No, not at all. I belong to the Friends of the Coastline in Longlet, and we've been following up coastline erosion over a period of more than 50 years. We've been fighting for more than 10 years to get this issue back on the table and with the district authorities, and in particular to looking at this the problem of dredging. There was a certain mayor who was, I'm not going to name, who was president of the district authorities. Over a 10-year period, we've gone back over to the 3-year limit. We can talk about this. There was a conference a month ago to talk about this. There's a specialized laboratory and what's been said recently doesn't correspond at all to reality. We fight on a district level for there to be a global debate on the entire coastal issue, and we've been saying for many years now, we hope that this will be taken into account now. And we're happy to see that this has finally been taken into account with at least things have been triggered. The gentleman here. My name is André Bess. I'm a general water and forest engineer, and I'm talking to Sud-Ouest as a newspaper, as a means of information, and also to its journalists. Thank you for having organized these 3 public meetings. I think some of the articles that last year that were published and which gave rise to a number of reactions were the check, the price for the of the storms, where you're saying it was exceptional, historical, saying that studies were needed. And that's why I want to speak to you today as a former head of studies at the Amiaca. This is one of the 50 or 100 studies which were carried out under the auspices of because at the time the study offices didn't work like now, because we had virtually no means, especially with the deadlines that we were given by Mr. Berzini. Here I have a document which I've reviewed, and I can see that it says in Soulac that the advance of the sea was very significant, because I was working at the Office of the Forests, and I had to study the coastline from Taunus to the Pointe de Grave. There were many elements to be taken into account. We had members of the Forestry Commission working on the dunes, and to measure erosion. There were no real, it was simply by observation with our eyes. So we went up to the top of the dune and compared where the sea was and had been in the past. And this was done from Taunus right to the north of Aquitaine. Taunus and Angles have a dune, which is a system of protection, their own protection system. It's what's called matrad, it's gravel, whereas for the rest of the Aquitaine coastline, we have a completely artificial system of dune, which was built by those who preceded us. It was a huge task. And this is a system of protection with the beach, the dune, 14, 15 meters in some places, whereas here it's very low. Behind, we have what's called the Let, behind the dune, and then pine forest. It's very beautiful for painters, but the sand is not very good, and then we have the forest with pine production. If there's the slightest attack on any of these parts, then there's an effect on all the other elements, which means that we need an area protection of 300 meters, 300 meter buffer zone. I'll come back to the coast in a minute. And any deterioration has an impact on the other aspects, either in the north, or to the north or the south, especially when there's any structural work, public works. This leads to percussions, which we don't always know perfectly. Second point now, the coast. Here as well, when we, as an example, I used in Bordeaux. I was young, I was naive, and I explained that the sea moved and that our sand moved. And for the coast, I often reminded people the example of Saint-Jean-de-Luz. If there hadn't been any protection in Saint-Jean-de-Luz with the three sea walls, especially Arta, the half of Saint-Jean-de-Luz is already in the ocean, and we wouldn't even know it was there anymore. I'll stop there, because I just simply wanted to say, I think that I'd like journalists to take into account all the work that has been done on the techniques and the policies. We now need to, society's obviously evolved now, and the answers to the studies have been perfected by many organizations. And since the Amiaka work, the system of organizing the area in Akasane has evolved. Has man been reasonable? Has he been respectful of the sea? Would you say that, would you have a positive view of Amiaka's work? If we followed Amiaka directives, then yes. Mr. Venac. The gentleman at the back now, Philippe. Could you please stand up for the camera? You don't have to smile, but at least stand up. My name is Stefan, I work at Surfrider, and I simply want to provide some extra information. We've been talking a lot about techniques, and there's a societal issue here, which is difficult for everyone, because we can discuss for a long time about how to protect different properties, the hotels, the casino. But the basic question that's being asked here is how and what process we accept losing things to the sea. Because as a human being, as a member, as an elected representative, it's very often difficult. The period of erosion which we're going to face, the rising of the oceans, renewable energies, there's a great deal of pressure on our organization, there's pressure on so I think one of the things that we need to bear in mind is that when we go home, is that we need to think about what we will all accept losing in this game democratically, so that we can come up, so that we can actually decrease the social pressure between associations, politicians. This is a question that each and every one of us need to admit that we're going to lose something. The process of the citizen is to accept the inevitable, say we'll do as much as we can to protect things, but we're going to have to make choices, and these choices are what's at stake. It's the major what's at stake for the future. I think we all need to accept certain people don't want to lose their homes, certain people don't want to lose the waves, the elected representatives don't want to be thrown out of office.
en général.
Mais pour garder leur mandat et leur clé, on va agir. Je suis un grand croyant dans les choses républicaines.
And I think
Et c'est leur
these are the basic questions that we need to all ask ourselves. What are we prepared to lose in this process? Gentleman in the front here, you're Mayor of Bidat. First Deputy Mayor of Bidat.
Je crois qu'il y avait une autre demande de question d'intervention, je ne sais plus où elle était. Il nous reste encore quelques minutes. On est bien. C'est intéressant.
We're very happy you're here. Could you stand up for the camera, please?
C'est pour la caméra. Vous n'êtes pas obligé de sourire.
Just simply to go back over what Stefan's been saying, the relevant scale for decisions has been the municipality. And even though we've not mentioned any names, the settlers have taken decisions which were perhaps not the most adapted for other with regard to other municipalities. But the first relevant scale is the district now. The district for the south. Albert, you can come to Bidat with your restaurants. We'll build them there. We have some space left. More seriously now. Albert is a member of the district authorities. Michel is part of the Bayonne-Biaitonglet district authorities. We heard some rumours about territorial change. Even the prefect is been feeding these rumours, and the scale of we need to think of things differently from the past. Not only in the coastline, I've talked about we cannot continue to have closed-door meetings. We need to work on another timescale, another form of openness. There are many technical solutions. We've talked about artificial reefs, for example, which have been able in Australia to save many places. Everybody knows here that these can provide good solutions. The ocean is a chance, it's an opportunity. Everybody here takes advantage of it. Guillaume Barreau is not going to say the opposite, but we need to learn to live with it. We need to learn if it can provide us things, and when we must defend ourselves and on what we've decided collectively. But as I said, this can't be a closed door meetings. Then we need to implement sustainable solutions. So the forms of protection which work. There are other municipalities which have experimented with these protections. In Bidat, for example, at Parliamentary Beach, on a very small scale, we've experimented with implementing rocks, which with the same storm, which in one in the storm exploded and another resisted. We talked about the 6-ton limited, but it doesn't just depend on the weight; it depends on the way they're fitted as well. So here again, there are solutions, but they need to be targeted, and we need to decide together what places are we going to protect, and we need to accept that nature will take back what belongs to it. And this is something we need to take into account. In Bidat, we have the helicopter pad which literally exploded in the last storm. We're not going to rebuild it. There's no sense, there's no point in rebuilding something that's going to be destroyed again in a couple of years. We'll have to find another place for helicopters to land. I think that in some places we need to accept, this is what Stefan was saying, of course it's not something we want to accept, but we've got to. We are not the boss here, nature is. The question of the financial situation of the authorities is worse and worse. It's catastrophic from Marseille to Brest and Strasbourg. It doesn't matter what political party is in power. Is it this not the time to go on to the next stage of things and work on a district level? I'm also president of the SCOT, a local organisation with several municipalities. It's an area of life which includes the Landes, but we're neighbours. We're neighbours. His town, Albert's town, is just in a southern district of my town. We're neighbours. With Albert Saint-Jean-de-Luz, we need to talk. We can't just simply draw an administrative line in the sand. And we need to work even looking inland as well. I'd like the opinion of Mr. Van Ack about this. Maybe even a declaration. In terms of pertinent territorial governance, I've been on the district authorities for 15 years now, and I think I've demonstrated my spirit, the way I work, and I think that the greater the stakes, whether the quality of bathing water, protecting the coast, we need to realize that no municipality can work in a vacuum. It's no longer possible. We need to find the right territorial scale to work on it, whether it be the district authorities, maybe even a bigger district authority. The issues are the same. We need to work on a regional level as well. We need to do things on a bigger scale. Should we put together the two district authorities, the Bayonne and Bayonne, Biarritz, Anglet, and Saint-Jean-de-Luz-en-Brie? The different district authorities which have seen the light over the last few years have worked at different speeds, but we can see that what's happening in one place may be happening in another, and so we have to talk to each other. We need to create relationships to deal with these problems. Are there any other questions from the public? I'm Guillaume Bahou. I'm on Biarritz Town Hall. I'm in charge of the environment. On what the mayor has said, I support what the mayor has said, but we're completely in phase with each other. I think, for example, the car park on the Côte des Basques, I think it's good that it's not been built because it will avoid fragilizing this area. I'd like to thank Sud-Ouest for organizing these 3 conferences. I think it's great that it's taken place in Biarritz, and that we've been able to realize here that the problem of the coastline is not the same necessarily on the Basque coast, in Gironde, in the Landes. I'm only been an elected representative for 3 months, and I think that it's great for decisions to be taken on a larger scale, but I'm nevertheless concerned to think that we'll be swamped in a bigger district authority where we don't always have the same concerns. In Biarritz, our specificity is that we're literally built right on top of the sea, and we cannot just let things happen. If we hadn't moved the sand back every single day on the beach, the casino would have been devastated. So not only do we have to protect ourselves, but we have to be offensive in our solutions. I think we need to win back from the sea. We talked about artificial reefs. We could talk about providing new sand. I don't think we inevitably need to be submersed by the ocean So to summarize what you've said, we need to be on the attack, not just on the defensive. We have a couple of questions from YouTube, which have been transcribed from Surfrider, which are coming in from across Europe. Mr. Vanak, perhaps you could answer this question. What specific measures will be taken for the Grande Plage and Myanmar Beach? Are there any immediate measures for the coming season that are going to be implemented before the next coming winter? The winter will be dry. No, seriously. We are thinking about preventive measures, but it's a very, very complex issue to take preventive measures. If the sea attacks the coastline, what we've been able to observe is that these attacks are increasingly frequent. That's the feeling we have, at least. That's the feeling we have, and so we need to prepare ourselves to preparing measures to stop these or to prevent these attacks or their effects. But of course, you need a budget for this, and you know what the economic situation is like today. Another question now: what about the projects for renovating piping in Biarritz to avoid rainwater, polluted rainwater entering the sea? In Biarritz, we've a network, we have a military network. The rainwater goes and sewage end up in the same pipes. This is something which is very worrying, because rainwater get what sewage is left, and so the result is that there's a greater amount of pollution. It's not good for our image. We've done a great deal in the past. We have a water sewage treatment plant, and we've provided 2 improvements to the system. The first improvement was to increase the capacity in the fishing port, and to send to the treatment plant a greater amount of sewage. That's a huge amount of progress. We can treat a greater amount of effluent. And secondly, we've also made the network smart. We've added sensors. Last year there were a few problems. The effluent didn't go to the retention tanks, which they should have done, and so this year we have the sensors. It's working much better. It's a kind of calibration. We're also working on problems of disinfecting water before it, and also on technological innovations. There's no top secret. We need even better, higher performance solutions. It's a costly fight, and the sewage is dealt with by the district authorities. Finally, if anybody would like to take the floor, would like to speak, we can continue, of course, our discussions, our debates in small groups. And Surfrider is offering everybody an aperitif drink. So you have at least 2 good reasons for having come today, the debate and the aperitif. Thank you, everybody, for coming and taking part. Read Sud-Ouest tomorrow, because everything that has been said today, or almost everything, will be in the paper tomorrow.